Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. I am Estefania Bravo, and this is From the South. After the death of a second Guatemalan child in U.S. custody, the government has announced medical checkups for every migrant child under their care. Every month, U.S. Customs and Border Protection processes thousands of minors, both accompanied and unaccompanied, and they rarely receive medical care. Now, the international community and human rights groups are criticizing the U.S. administration after 2 minors died while in the custody of U.S. immigration. In the most recent case, an 8-year-old boy migrant died on Tuesday in a New Mexico hospital. He was diagnosed with a cold and a fever and has been taken back into custody. But he was soon returned to hospital with nausea and vomiting. He had been in U.S. Customs and Border Protection custody since December 18th after being separated from his father. His father, Agustin Gomez, is still in detention. Our correspondent in Guatemala City, Mario Rosales, brings us the latest.
The Human Rights Office in Guatemala has published a statement condemning the death of a second migrant child in U.S. custody in less than 2 weeks. The child was an 80-year-old and was arrested at the Mexico-U.S. border alongside his father on December 18th, whilst trying to cross the border into Texas. It has been reported that the child had a fever and was vomiting, like in the case of Jacqueline Cao. In the afternoon of December 24th, as Jacqueline's funeral was being prepared in her hometown, this second case made headlines. The Human Rights Office here in Guatemala is asking the government to oversee the investigations the United States is conducting to determine what happened with Jacqueline Cao and with this second child.
And the family and friends of Jacqueline Cao have bid their final goodbyes to the 7-year-old Guatemalan migrant who died in U.S. custody earlier this month. Jacqueline was laid to rest on Christmas Day in San Antonio, Secortes, after her body was repatriated from the United States. Previously, relatives and neighbors held a wake for the girl. Jacqueline's death raised many questions about how migrants are treated at the hands of U.S. immigration authorities. Let's hear from our correspondent in Guatemala, Santiago Boton, who attended her funeral.
Saludos, colegas y amigos televidentes.
Yet another burial is carried out as a result of migration. This time, it's for Jacqueline Rosemary Cao McQueen, the 7-year-old indigenous Mayan girl who died under the custody of the Border Patrol Agency in the United States on December 8th. She was buried on the afternoon of the 25th because it symbolizes the sunset of life as it is interpreted in Mayan culture. Her wake lasted 24 hours and was held in the home she left over a month ago. According to Santiago Putul, one of the people I spoke to during the funeral, the child's death came only after her father tried to run away from the misery and neglect this community suffers at the hands of the Guatemalan government. One of the Catholic ministers who attended the funeral, Juan Atot, also told us that extreme poverty sentenced the child to one of 2 painful destinies: death or becoming another teenage mom, a story that's very common for children in neglected areas such as this.
We thank Santiago for that report. U.S. President Donald Trump has said the partial government shutdown will continue until his demands are met for funds to build a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. He also, once again, mocked the migrants, saying once the wall is finished, it would take an Olympian to jump over it.
The only thing that stops it's a wall. And when the Democrats talk about a wall, does it mean anything? Well, in Israel, they had a big problem. They put up a wall. 99.99% of the people were stopped from coming in. And we'll have the exact same thing. Now, we have a long, long border, but we'll have the exact same thing. Now, there may be the case of an Olympic champion who can get over the wall, but for the most part, it's you're not able to do it. Very high, it's going to be 30 feet. Much of it is 30 feet high. Some of it's lower. But in some areas, we have it as high as 30 feet. That's like a 3-story building.
Donald Trump has made a surprise visit to U.S. troops in Iraq just days after the Pentagon chief resigned. President Trump said he won't pull troops out of Iraq. He plans to make it a military base to carry out operations in Syria and against the Islamic State. It's his first visit to a combat zone and comes less than a week after he announced the withdrawal of troops from Syria. This move led to the resignation of Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. Temporary relief centers have been set up in Indonesia's Java Island for victims of Saturday's devastating tsunami. This is part of an effort to prevent the spread of diseases. Besides ongoing search and rescue efforts, disease control has become the most important issue on Java Island. In addition to medical care, psychiatric treatment is also being provided to victims grieving their many losses. The death toll has so far risen to 430. According to doctors, the spread of diseases is common following a tsunami. And as relief efforts continue, shelters are beginning to struggle with the rising numbers of victims and evacuees. Over 1,000 tsunami survivors are staying in a futsal stadium being used as temporary shelter. Authorities have begun asking for help to assist people in shelters. Guyana's government will be presented with a report outlining all legal options on Thursday. It is preparing to respond to a vote of no confidence which toppled the ruling coalition and may force a general election. The special subcommittee has been appointed to advise on this matter. Government MP Sharon Das Persaud voted with the opposition on the no confidence motion. The Constitution allows for the motion to pass if there is a majority, but if it does not define a majority, one prominent attorney has argued that majority means 34 out of 65 seats in the National Assembly. The vote was passed 33 to 32. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The ALBA blog has condemned the United States' adoption of the NICA Act, which imposes severe economic and financial restrictions on Nicaragua. The Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza tweeted a communique from the Bolivarian Alliance of the Peoples of Our America. It says, the countries of the ALBA TCP condemn this violation of the most elementary norms of international law. It says the legislation is an attack on the sovereignty of the entire region. The Guatemalan Foreign Ministry says that 11 members of the International Commission Against Impunity will be allowed to enter the country after being expelled by President Jimmy Morales. With this announcement, the Foreign Ministry is complying with a resolution of the Constitutional Court, which ordered the renewal of visas for the CSIC officials. On December 18th, the employees of the organization were given 72 hours to leave Guatemala. And as 2018 comes to a close, we are taking a look at some of the biggest stories this past year. Leftist Latin American leaders became the targets of an unconventional tactic known as lawfare, the use of the legal system as an attack. The most notorious cases were those of Cristina Fernández de Kirchner in Argentina, Lula da Silva in Brazil, and Rafael Correa in Ecuador. We detail their struggles in this report.
Lawfare is the use of legal instruments for the purpose of political persecution and destruction of public image, combining legal actions with extensive press coverage to put pressure on political figures so that they lose popular support. Between November 2nd of 2017 and March 6th of 2018, former Argentine President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner received 3 judicial prosecutions. 2 were for presumed crimes of corruption. In August, Argentine lawmakers voted to allow investigators to search the homes of the former president as part of the so-called Notebooks corruption case. But the former president has said that the legal moves were part of a political persecution.
I'm going to be the first senator whose house is being searched. I have been the first female president and also the first senator to be expelled from the majority bloc. As you can see, I have a vocation to do unprecedented things. Because if something was missing to consecrate the political persecution and the use of the judicial power as an instrument of political persecution in Argentina, it was this lawsuit.
As police raids were carried out on her properties, supporters of Cristina Fernández de Kirchner saw serious inconsistencies with the case against the former president.
Specifically, in the case of Cristina Kirchner, there is a persecution that obeys interests which transcends Argentina.
But in November, a federal judge ruled that there was not sufficient evidence in the so-called K-Money route case against the former president and current senator. Despite lack of proof, the judge did not acquit Cristina. Instead, he requested more information from Argentina's Financial Information Unit in order to link the former president with the crime she was accused of. In January, the Supreme Court of Brazil ratified a 12-year sentence for former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva for alleged involvement in the Operation Car Wash case. He was accused of receiving an apartment, but no evidence of Lula's ownership was provided during the trial. Lula's defense and supporters maintained that the entire process of the trial was a form of lawfare and political persecution. In April, federal judge Sergio Moro issued an arrest warrant to order Lula to begin his sentence. Lula agreed to turn himself in, but was prevented from doing so by his supporters, who blocked his car from leaving the building in Sao Paulo. Speaking to the crowd, Lula addressed what he described as attacks from the country's right-wing controlled media.
National TV is attacking, and more than 70 covers of magazines are talking badly of me. Millions of pages in the newspapers are attacking me. Radio stations are attacking. But they don't realize that the more they attack, the greater my relationship with the Brazilian people becomes. The coup did not stop with what they did to Dilma. It will only stop when they defeat Lula to be candidate to presidency of the Republic in 2018. They don't want me to take part, not only for the freedom of choosing, they also want to take away our rights. Poor people can't eat good meat. Poor people can't go on a plane. Poor people can't go to university. Poor people are born, according to their logic, to be second class.
Lula was the leading candidate for the 2018 presidential elections. Even while in prison, all of the polls predicted a first-round victory for him. In August, members of the Workers' Party registered Lula da Silva as their candidate, while thousands marched in support of Lula's bid for office.
Arriving here and having this document in our hands is an immense victory. It's not our victory. It's not a victory for the PT, for Lula. It's a victory for the Brazilian people. It's a victory for those who have believed in social justice and for those who have believed in a better Brazil.
However, that same month, Brazil's top electoral court ruled that Lula could not run for a third term based on a clean record law, which applied to candidates. This judicial move opened the door for far-right Jair Bolsonaro, an open admirer of Brazil's military dictatorship period who shocked many with his derogatory remarks on women and LGBTQ people. Bolsonaro takes office January 1st. Our final case of lawfare takes place in Ecuador. On July 3rd, the National Court of Justice ordered the detention of former President Rafael Correa and requested the assistance of Interpol to apprehend him for extradition. He was accused of involvement in the 2012 kidnapping of a former opposition lawmaker.
We are not surprised. We expected something like that. During recent weeks, we have...
During an exclusive interview with Telesur, the former president denounced the political persecution against him and his supporters in Ecuador.
What we have to understand is that this is part of an international strategy, but the world looks away. How outrageous is the international hypocrisy and double standards? If I had done to an opponent what they did to Lula, we would already be invaded. If we had broken the constitution, as this government has broken it, we would already be sued all over the world. In Ecuador, there is a coup d'etat, there is repression, there is torture. The world must know this situation, which is part of a global strategy, as they cannot beat us in the ballot box. They apply lawfare.
It didn't stop there. The new Ecuadorian government took additional steps to prevent the former president from returning as a candidate.
That is called lawfare, you know. They cannot defeat us in elections, so they try to defeat us using the judicial system. So we have to stop that. That is not democracy. And they are invented whatever they want because they are controlling everything, the media, the judicial system, the National Assembly, etc., in order to pursue, especially leftist leaders, but in the case of Ecuador, myself and my government team.
On December 5th, Interpol rejected Ecuador's Red Notice request, arguing that there was insufficient evidence to link Correa with the kidnapping case. Ousted Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff, Fernando Lugo in Paraguay, the list goes on. The lawfare strategy has been politically immobilizing.
In Mexico, families led a march in the capital to remember the 43 missing students and to demand justice for their loved ones. Back in 2014, the 43 were part of a larger group of pupils from a teacher training college in Ayotzinapa who traveled to Iguala to protest against what they saw as discriminatory hiring practices for educators. The group was confronted and detained by police, but have not been seen since. Relatives are calling for a fresh investigation to be launched into their disappearance. Meanwhile, Mexico's newly installed president has signed a decree creating an investigative commission to unravel the unresolved case.
We will continue to march here, in our country, to remember this stain on the legacy of the previous Enrique Peña Nieto administration. We will continue to demand that justice is served, and those responsible for these students' disappearance are punished and made to feel the full brunt of the law.
The government of Mexico has appointed an investigative team to determine the cause of the helicopter crash that killed the governor of Puebla and her husband. It has also requested the help of the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board. Mexican authorities have ruled out the use of explosives in the accident. Governor Marta Erika Alonso and former Governor and Senator Rafael Moreno died on Monday, along with 2 pilots and the governor's assistant.
After a thorough and careful analysis of the wreckage of the aircraft, they did not find any explosives or non-combustible substances that exploded inside the aircraft.
And the vigil for the deceased couple has been held in Puebla. Relatives and friends gathered to say their last goodbye, as residents of the area await news about what caused the accident in the first place.
We want the truth. We want this to be clarified so we can be at ease, for everybody's sake, for the sake of Mexico, for the sake of the people in Puebla.
The government of Colombia will extend a ban on individuals carrying guns for the whole of 2019. President Iván Duque signed a decree which nonetheless allows people to apply for special permission to carry a weapon. This clause was requested by lawmakers from Duque's own Democratic Center Party. Some sectors of the opposition have opposed the incorporation of the clause. It is no secret that Argentina is struggling to strengthen its severely weakened economy. At the moment, 32.6% of the population live below the poverty line. We detail their challenges in this report.
There will be little to celebrate this New Year's Eve in thousands of Argentine homes. A third of the country's population live in poverty, a figure which has grown alarmingly in the last 12 months. The new data is overwhelming. 13 million people in the country are in poverty.
With the economic policies the government are pushing, demonstrations are going to grow. A year has passed and teachers are yet to sign wage agreements. It means the administration is moving forward with its economic model, so protests on the street will continue.
The number of families sleeping on the street is multiplying every day because they don't have the resources to rent a place to live. It's estimated that 10% of the population are on the poverty threshold, which means that close to 2.5 million Argentinians can afford basic amenities.
Mauricio Macri's government wants to keep its policy of starvation, of destroying sources of work, of shutting down schools. He's closing factories and hospitals. He wants to control everything through repression.
The gap between those who have the most with those who have least continues to grow. The rich have more than 31.8%, whilst the poorest have just 1.7%. The wealthiest sector of society have 18 times more income than the poorest.
The people united will never be defeated. Today more than ever, let's work for unity between workers. It's something that you didn't see too often before we have to turn this into a big inclusive national democratic front to defeat this government in the polls, so that the neoliberalism doesn't return to Argentina and we can kick it out of Latin America.
The tough situation poor neighborhoods find themselves in is becoming more evident. Hunger and unemployment are growing. 60% of the population live in areas with the risk of flooding or near landfills. With the flooding in recent days, there's little to celebrate in these holidays.
We'll be back very soon with us. Welcome back. Hundreds of migrants in Europe are still fleeing Africa, even during these festivities. Our correspondent in Spain, Sergio Rodrigo, has the details.
On December 24th and 25th, more than 50 people were rescued by the Spanish Coast Guard. 4 boats have also gone missing with 200 people on board. So far, 50 people who were on one of those vessels have been rescued, while 6 others on a smaller boat were also brought to safety. More than 60,000 people have tried to reach Europe via the Mediterranean Sea route. And so, the death toll keeps growing. And according to the International Organization for Migration, at least 700 people have disappeared or died trying to reach Spain.
We thank Sergio Rodrigo for that report. The opposition in the Democratic Republic of Congo has reacted angrily to the decision to delay elections until March in at least 3 cities. There will be a delay in the city of Beni, which has been dealing with an Ebola outbreak since August. Also affected is the city of Yumbi, where ethnic violence led to the murders of more than 100 people. The opposition has described the move as a government ploy because the regions in question are opposition strongholds.
This decision made by the Electoral Commission is a suicidal decision. This is an unfounded decision. We know very well that the disease that is being invoked for the Butembo-Beni region is a disease that has no impact on the holding of elections.
However, the Electoral Commission has defended its decision and said it is acting within the law.
If the CNE fails to organize an election in one or more constituencies, the procedure is clear. We will take into account the votes validly cast and available. Go and read Article 84 of the implementation measures. That's what's going to happen because we're not going to stop everything. Even in the most civilized countries, we have seen in the US that votes in Carolina are being recounted.
Israel's parliament has voted to dissolve itself and hold early elections in April, 7 months before their November due date. On Monday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with the political parties within his coalition who agreed to hold early elections. Netanyahu's coalition has been struggling with a 1-seat majority since his defense minister stepped down in November. Early elections are almost a norm in Israel, as no government has served out its full term since 1988. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said the country is ready to deploy its hypersonic nuclear-capable missiles next year. The announcement came after the Defense Ministry confirmed the first test launch of the missile system known as Avangard from an airbase in the southwest of the country. In March, Putin had announced an array of new weapons, including the Avangard. He observed the launch from the Defense Ministry headquarters in Moscow.
The new Avangard missile system is invincible for today's and future air defense systems and missile defense systems. This is a big success and a big victory.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.